Okay, so yeah, now the recording has started. Evita Schmieg and Harini Nagendra, you can reactivate your cameras now. So yeah, again, a very warm welcome from my side to this opening session of this year's Urban October GIZ. And before we dive into the exciting inputs that are planned for today, I will give you a quick outlook on today's agenda. So we will start this session in just a few moments with the opening remarks by Dr. Evita Schmieg. She's the head of the Division for Energy, Urban Development and Mobility at the Federal German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ for short, as most of you will know. And her address will underline the importance BMZ places on sustainable urban development and its vision. An essential part of this vision are climate neutral and resource efficient cities that not only improve quality of life, but also play a key role in preserving biodiversity and fostering resilient urban futures. And her opening remarks will be followed by our keynote speaker and urban ecologist Harini Nagendra. She's the director of the Research Center as well as director of the School of Climate Change and Sustainability at the Azim Premji University in Bangalore. Happy to have you here. And she's known for her research spanning over 30 years of forest conservation and urban sustainability. And she will shed some light on the question, how can we root our urban future in nature, which will also be followed by a quick 10 to 15 minutes Q&A sessions where you, the audience, can ask some questions. And last but not least, Kristian Lempa, the head of the Global Department, Global Policy, Governance and Cities, will connect the impressions gained today with the work GIZ is doing in sustainable urban development, and he will also give a brief outlook on the events and topics that will be covered during the Urban October GIZ. So yeah, with that being said, and without further ado, I will now hand over the digital microphone to Evita Schmieg for her opening remarks. Ms. Schmieg, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian. Before I really start, I want to say I hope you don't hear noise in the background because there is some urban development in the form of reconstruction of this house taking place. And from time to time there's noise, so I hope that won't disturb the session. So thanks for the nice introduction. Dear audience, dear partners, and dear colleagues from GIZ and BMZ. On behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, I am very happy to officially welcome you to this year's Urban October at GIZ. My name is Dr. Evita Schmieg, and I'm since August this year, so very short only, I'm heading the Division Climate, Urban Development and Mobility in BMZ. I'm very much looking forward to getting to know you in this position. Let me start by thanking our implementing agency, GIZ, for organizing an impressive program for this Urban October, ranging from urban financing to urban food management to smart cities solutions. Why does urban development matter to German development cooperation? Today's cities are centers of economic activity. 80% of global economic output takes place in cities. This comes at a certain cost. Cities cause 70% of global carbon dioxide emissions and consume over 70% of global resources. This makes them a major driver of climate change. But they are also centers for social diversity and cultural innovation, thus contributing to social coherence and societal development. It is cities where environmental, climate, and social challenges are particularly acute. But due to their densities, the possibilities and range of solutions are manifold. This is why sustainable urban development is a core task for the present and for the future. It does combine ecological, economic, and social dimensions and determines how livable, resilient, and equitable our cities and our life in cities will be. This is why urban development is of fundamental importance for my ministry, the Ministry for Development Cooperation. Striving for livable, resilient, and equitable communities is at the core of development. So what is the challenge for the city of the future? The cities of the future must be planned and built very differently from today's cities. We need to fundamentally change the relationship between cities and nature. Wherever feasible, we must employ the solutions that nature provides, so-called nature-based solutions. In just a few moments, our keynote speaker, Harini Nagendra, who is the real expert in the topic, will give us more insight on this issue. Nature-based solutions in an urban context mean that we utilize the power of nature to solve problems in the city. For example, this could be a green park that cools the air and absorbs rainwater. It could mean green roofs that improve the urban climate. It could mean trees that provide shade and filter air pollution. Such solutions help to combat challenges that cities are more and more exposed to, such as extreme heat, flooding, or bad air. At the same time, nature-based solutions make cities more livable and healthier for people. They contribute also to the social and societal role of cities by creating places for recreation and social interaction. But despite the proven benefits, today less than 0.3% of spending on urban infrastructure is channeled into nature-based solutions, so very few. Many projects fail due to a lack of long-term funding. BMZ therefore supports action in this area. We believe that well-designed and implemented solutions can bring multiple benefits for climate change mitigation and adaptation, for biodiversity conservation and people, thus contributing to the achievement of various SDGs. To give you another example on where we are active, we support the C40 Cities Finance Facility, a multi-donor initiative co-funded by BMZ and others that helps cities in finding public and private financing solutions for infrastructure projects. Within the city's finance facility, we focus on projects that work on implementing nature-based solutions while addressing marginalized groups. And there are many more projects, but enlisting them would be much too long, and I know you're all waiting for the main speaker to come up. Ms. Harini Nagendra, thank you very much for being with us today. Ms. Harini Nagendra is known for her research spanning over 30 years on forest conservation and urban sustainability. Her work on forests is multidimensional and remote and combines remote sensing, biodiversity studies, and institutional analysis. I am very delighted to have you here. We are all curious to hear your insights and ideas on the subject. How do we root our urban future in nature? The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Schmieg. I'm really appreciative of BMZ and GIZ for this invitation to launch Urban October. And I also think it's just a very nice opportunity for us to all get together and discuss the future of the world, which is the future of cities. I think the two are so intertwined today. If you give me a second, I will just share my screen and then we can begin. Yes. So I am talking about how do we root our urban future in nature. And Julian, if you have any problems in looking at and finding the slides, just let me know. Right. And I lead the School of Climate Change and Sustainability at Azim Premji University in India. And I've been working on people-nature relationships for the past 33 years now in forests and in cities. And I wanted to talk to you today about the issues of biodiversity in nature in cities and why they are getting lost and what we could potentially do about this collectively. Now, the world is experiencing a massive urban transition, which you already just heard about. Here are some night lights images which show you, for instance, how India and China and many other parts of the world, including Europe, are lit up at night. We are already a world that is more than 50% urban and will become 75% urban by 2050. Now, where are the fastest growing cities? Because to some extent in cities that have already grown, there is you can redesign, you can redevelop, but the greatest opportunities to implement sustainable development are in the cities that are yet to develop. And if you look at the world's fastest developing cities on the earth, they're largely in India or in the global south. You have Delhi, Mumbai, Riyadh, Hyderabad, Bangalore. My city is the fastest growing in the world. Ho Chi Minh, Manila. And if you look at the rate of urbanization in countries like India, India is now the most populous country in the world, of course. The urban population has grown from 17% in 1950 to 33% where we are now. And it will grow at breakneck speed to 20,000. By 2050, we will be 50% urban. That is a world that in 100 years, a country that shifts its focus from being only 17% urban to more than 50% urban. This also means this image is a composite from Esri, and it shows you a composite over time of the increasing or decreasing night lights, which tells you whether urbanization is increasing or decreasing. And if you look at India, the blue is lights on, which means most of India is actually growing in urbanization. So are many parts of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal. But if you look at many parts of the USA, and the situation would be similar for some parts of Europe, you have a lot of pink lights going off, de-urbanizing cities, shrinking cities. So the kinds of problems you have to deal with or the challenges of urban sustainability in these two kinds of places, locations can be quite different. At the same time, so you look at, and this is not just a recent problem, a paper we did in 2018 looking at the urban cities in the global south, what people call the developed world otherwise, have very different patterns from the global north. So if you look at the green, which is the global south, transition, developing, and least developed countries, they've always had a much higher growth rate. From the 1970s to 2014, you'll see the green bar is much higher than the blue bar, showing that the population growth rates have always been higher in global south cities. It's not just a recent phenomenon. If you look at UN data, which we also analyzed in this paper, looking at the differences between various social and environmental parameters, whether it's youth unemployment rate, under 5 mortality rates, poverty, exposure to PM10, air pollution, water percentages of informal households or slums, access to internet, homicide rates, literacy rates, literally every context, social and environmental context that defines a sustainable city, you will see that the global north, defined by the blue again, is very, very different from parameters in the global south. It is difficult, it's challenging to design sustainability cities in the global south because you have high under 5 mortality rates, low internet, no access to water or sanitation, low rates of literacy, and a number of other challenges. So the context, therefore, in the global south is very, very different. Very high population densities, very high growth rates, very low penetration of things like the internet, low financial capacities, low literacy rates, and yet they have to design sustainable cities. Where do they do this? If you look at the influential papers, and we again did this analysis looking at the top 1,000 papers, the most cited papers on urban sustainability over a decade, from 2008 to 2017 in this analysis, you will see that 343 of the top 1,000 papers were by authors in North America, 369 were by authors in Europe, which means 70% of the data or the people writing papers on sustainable cities come from North America or Europe. China accounts for 20%, but India, other global south-like countries is maybe 0.5% put together. So there's almost no work on sustainable cities done in the local context. There's also very little work done on these cities. Only 7% are from the global south and from countries like, for instance, Hyderabad or Bangalore, Ibadan or Belem. Most of the cities are either global analyses or global north analyses, which means we have an information gap that is very, very critical. How do we design sustainable cities in this very, very different context of the global south if we have almost no data from them? If all the influential papers come from global north context and they try and implement these solutions, for instance, smart cities in a country where maybe potholes need to be fixed first, or there are other basic issues, or the kind of demographic context will not allow for a certain simple transplanting of global north solutions. Now, this is something I've been working on for a long time. And ever since we started looking at the fact that urbanization is leading to a lot of challenges, not unique to the global south, but certainly far more prevalent in global south cities. You might have water pollution from frothing and foaming, like the picture on my top left shows. You would have heat island effects, especially in informal settlements, which are made of plastic and aluminum sheets. You have flooding when the cities, when rainfall becomes especially intense, as it has been very recently in many parts of India. And you have now very, very, very high rates of air pollution in Indian cities, Chinese cities, and many other parts of the world. How do Indian cities cope with these? I wanted to show you a reflection of one Indian city, my own, Bangalore, which, as I showed you in one of the previous slides, is now one of the fastest growing cities in the world, not just in India, but in the world. It is a city that is well known for its IT industry, for a lot of commercial investments in real estate. And as you can see in this map, the Bangalore of 1537, the year it was founded, was this very tiny polygon, the maroon polygon right in the center. It has now grown exceedingly rapidly. It doubles every 5 to 7 years. Bangalore is also an odd city to be one of the fastest growing cities in the world in terms of nature. It's very deprived of nature. It is, as you can see from this map, this is how Bangalore looked even up to 1792. Very barren, very dry. It's on a plateau. So the weather is not as hot, but it's still hot. It's still India. Very open. And it's in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats without any access to perennial sources of water, which means it's a water-deprived, semi-arid landscape. How does a water-deprived, semi-arid landscape of this kind become one of the fastest growing cities in the world? Well, it does because people created lakes or irrigation tanks across a topographic gradient in the entire city, connecting these so that when it does rain, rainwater flows from a lake at higher elevations to a lake at next elevations and then all the way down. And open wells and wetlands harvest the water. So these are the original, just like a sponge city you would find in China. This was the same idea. Lakes were created by people, not just by rulers, and by people for a philanthropic purpose, for the support of animals, cattle. These are inscription stones, for instance, which tell you whether they wanted the service of the goddess, they wanted to please the goddess, they wanted their families to attain merit in the afterlife. So creating a lake, maintaining a lake was not just something that rulers did, but something that ordinary people. There are even lakes named after local prostitutes. So people of all kinds of, across the spectrum of ordinary people contributing to lakes for the goodness of the communities around them, for the goodness of, and for sacred and spiritual needs. The inscription stones you see have these very often repeated phrases that tell you that they had a three-dimensional appreciation of a city as being a space of nature. For instance, here's one inscription from the village of Kempapura, which is now part of the old airport of Bangalore. And it talks about the description of a village and a lake which is granted to the god, the local god. If you look at the text highlighted in yellow, it describes the lake as having the wells underground and the trees overground within the four boundaries. It's such a beautiful three-dimensional appreciation of land, which we have forgotten today. And of course, Bangalore is a post-colonial city. We follow the British colonial systems of mapping land, as I'm sure you do in Germany and in many parts of Europe. So land is just geographic boundaries. It does not include the wells underground with the life-giving water below the ground, or the trees above ground with the life-giving shade above the ground. In fact, the first thing you would do in a land-strapped city like Bangalore, where land is very expensive, is if you had a well, to fill in the well so you could build on top of it. And if you had a tree, to cut down the tree so you could again build every square inch of your land, because that every square inch is very valuable. But this is a beautiful three-dimensional appreciation of nature, which means we should learn from the people who came to build these cities, our founding fathers. They also had inscriptions that next to the lake that they created, which said that they wanted it to endure as long as the sun and moon endured, as long as the rocks, the Kaveri River, the grass, and the earth endured, which means they were thinking of sustainability well into the future. Whereas we now think of building a house that lasts maybe 30 years or 40 years before you break it down, right? So they had a very different imagination in mind, and they had fearful curses. So if you destroyed this lake, you would incur the sin of having slaughtered cows and Brahmins. You would be worms in ordure, or my truly favorite curse, someone who destroyed the lake would be reborn as the husband of his own mother. Right? So you don't want to mess with these curses. There are spiritual and sacred curses that are lines in the sand that say, do not cross here, don't destroy nature. But of course, as the city modernized, we had more and more people coming into Bangalore. It became a colonial city. You have the cantonment in the city. The maps here show you the black dots being wells, the blue areas being lakes, and you see that there was a lot of cultivation, the green areas, and the urban land cover was brown. And people did cross over that line and start to destroy the lakes. So for a while, from 600 AD or thereabouts till 1888, as more and more people came to Bangalore and the boundaries of the city expanded, they created more and more lakes and water bodies, planted more and more trees. But at one point, what happened is the city started to run out of water, and technology came in that allowed us to pipe water from distant water sources and dam lakes for irrigation purposes. The moment you had that, and the fact that people realized you could bring water into the city through pipes and open a tap and get water, the spiritual and sacred and community and commoning aspects around lakes completely disappeared. And you will see the decline of these lakes and the wells around them and the trees in the city from 1885 to 2014. The reason being, again, that you had air conditioning, you didn't need the trees, you could bring in pipe water, you didn't need the wells. But who was the you who didn't need the water and the trees? The wealthy in the city, the influential in the city, because they were the ones in the houses which used air conditioning, which could get piped water, and the poor still continue to depend on the city. And you can see this map, so Bangalore was a city of lakes. It now became a city where lakes and channels and wells were uncared for. Trees were cut in the millions, while the city floods now and runs out of water. And the map above you is a city map, which tells you these are the surviving lakes and streams. And what you'll see is in the heart of the city, which is the oldest part of the city, you have almost no lakes and wells left because they were completely replaced. In the edges, though, you do have people, not the wealthy, but the regular people, which is the majority of the city, who depend on nature in the city for a wide range of services. For play, as you can see, these children in the informal settlement, they hang saris from the trees and use them as their swings because they don't have access to playgrounds. You will see the woman above combing her hair. She has aloe vera in her garden because, as I spoke to her, her married daughter uses the aloe vera for a face pack. And she told me, people like you go to the parlor. For people like us, our garden is our parlor. You can see the gentleman below washing his cows in the water. And everybody needs a place. If you have cow herds in the city, as we do in all Indian cities, you need a place to wash your cows. If for the dhobis, the commercial launderers who you'll see the clothes on the way, they need the lake as a place to wash their clothes. And the gentleman at the top left stops to pray at a tree. This is very common in Latin American, African, and Asian cities where nature is still very sacred. There are gods and goddesses who make their homes. There's a cosmology of relationships in this. And therefore, they relate to trees in wide variety of ways. For instance, you can see the lady on the bottom right, who is a migrant worker. When the lake dries up in a time of drought, she comes to the lake and instead of catching fish, she will harvest these greens from the water side of the lake and use it to feed her children. And we find that patterns of foraging around lakes and parks in India, for instance, in Bangalore, are very strong and continue to be there. For instance, we spoke 202 women from low-income settlements, and we found that they forage and know about 76 different greens that they actually forage from. This is the heart of the largest, fastest growing city in the world, right? All of this imagination is gone from urban planning today. So when you restore lakes, you forget that they were commons used by a variety of people. You forget that trees reduced pollution and heat. For instance, trees, a study that we did, you can look at this. We looked at trees, from wooded streets above to the non-wooded streets below. And if you run an air sampler, you can see that the air sampler, when you don't have trees, is black. That's the kind of pollution that is filling our lungs today. When you have trees, it cuts down the smog substantially. Trees reduce the heat, the ambient air temperature by 3 to 5 degrees, but reduce the asphalt surface temperature by as much as 30 degrees centigrade, which means you could be walking on a road where the asphalt is radiating heat at 60 degrees, even 70 degrees, which means you can't walk, you can't cycle, you can't take the bus, your metros will collapse, maybe even the steel starts to melt, right? And yet, we don't look at the importance of these trees. So you can look at, these are quotes from street vendors who talk about the fact that when they lose trees, they lose an entire, just a way of living. It's their fate. They still have to do this for their living. These are not people consulted in planning. If you look at the government, this is the municipality, boards around lakes, they forbid plucking, they forbid use of plants and trees, they forbid swimming, forbid, interacting with the lake in any way except bird watching. It's a very utilitarian imagination of nature that policymakers have. And indeed, you have, people protesting for the protection of lakes, but you also have people protesting against this, saying, we want Bangalore to be Singapore. Who is sponsoring NGOs? This is a photograph from a few years ago where there were groups of people fighting for the lake and against the lake, wanting the lake to be converted into a special economic zone where you could have large buildings coming up. This is not, now let's zoom out from Bangalore. If you look at the global picture, what I'm talking about is not just unique to Bangalore. So for instance, my colleague Arvind Lakshmisha, a student of ours, Abdul Fattah Nazar, and I looked at nature-based solutions in cities across the global south. We used two atlases, OPLA and the Urban Natural Atlas, and we had 1,700 cases of documented implementation of nature-based solutions in cities. Of the 1,700 cases, coming back to full circle to my original slide, you have only 120 cases from the global south. So you'll see that the implementation is in the global south is severely understudied. What we do find is in the global south, the primary focus is on biodiversity conservation and recreation. And all the other aspects that we have seen from our research to be very important in global south context, in India and India-like context, in African cities, Latin American cities, South Asian, Southeast Asian cities, are ignored. For instance, nobody talks about the spiritual, nobody talks about the sacred, nobody talks about the fact that nature-based solutions provide livelihoods. They're important for water use by migrants. And when these are implemented, these programs are led by government and NGOs. And if there is at all any citizen participation, it's very tokenistic. They involve citizens in aspects like planting on a tree planting day, but not in the making of the plans themselves. Now, is this inevitable? I think we need to now go towards solutions of hope. And where are the pathways of hope? So we have found a few things. One is, I was in Bombay last week and looking at some redesigned parks which have been reclaimed from builders and attacks. So very powerful real estate interests were trying to capture these parks at the edge of the city, coastal area zones. They have been taken back by communities which have been maintaining them for 10 or 15 years now. And what they said was it's important now. What is most important is the process, not the plans. The process has to be group process, and the process has to be something that allows placemaking. And this is something we found in Bangalore too. When we looked at 3 restored lakes and interviewed a diversity of 100 lake visitors, which could be the migrant workers working around it, original village residents, child of the lake, a mother of a differently abled child, we found that they all forged strong connections to the lake. And they valued the ecosystem for imaginations, for placemaking. It is where a new migrant comes in and feels involved with the city and feels part of the city. Maybe they see a bird or a tree that they used to see in their home, but they start saying, this is my city. And then they get together for lake restoration movements. Then they come together for environmental protection movements to say, stop tree felling across the road. For instance, there was a very successful project that is called Steel Flower Beda. Beda means we don't want it in Kannada. And this kind of protest helps to protect trees and to stop them being cut down from infrastructure projects. Informal settlements also play a very important role because a lot of the poor, low-income migrants come into informal settlements. And yet, despite the fact that it's so full of migrants, they have the highest proportion of local and useful species because, again, they have sacred uses, they have spiritual uses, and they also have health uses because they plant species that have medicinal uses for them and nutritional uses. And so the lessons we've seen going forward is that two. One is that ecology in the city, nature-based services, is typically valued purely in terms of utilitarian services and monetary value. And now if you're just valuing them based on their monetary contribution to the city, that pits biodiversity against economic growth and development. And in places like Bangalore, where you have a juggernaut of development, it's a losing battle. You need to have and retain the multi-dimensional appreciation of value. Yes, there's economic value, but there are also provisioning services for livelihoods. Nature plays a very important role in mental and physical health, in spiritual and sacred needs, in placemaking and making citizens contribute to the city. Policymakers will only appreciate this when they are pushed to the fact to understand that they need to restore ecosystems as commons, which integrate diverse cultural views of different migrants. when they don't only value them as public goods, which means on recreation and regulating services, and they very importantly do not hand them over to private investors who only look at them as gates and tickets and places where they can have guards to have return on investment. And eventually what this tells us is, like I learned from my Bombay experience, that we must value the process over the plan, because plans may disappear in 5 to 10 years, projects may disintegrate in 5 to 10 years. But if you have a process of involving communities in planning for their own locations, the process changes imagination, and that is what lingers into the future, and that is what is truly sustainable. I'll stop here with just a nod to some of the books I've written. Shades of Blue, talking about water issues in Indian cities, Cities in Canopies, which talk about trees in Indian cities, and Nature in the City, which is an ecological history of India over the past, of Bangalore over the past 1,500 years. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to questions if we have some time for this.
Thank you very much, Harini. Very inspiring, very insightful. I think a little round of digital applause would be good now. Okay, so thanks again, and we also want to open up this round for questions from the audience, like a little Q&A session. So dear audience, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or type the question into the chat. Meanwhile, maybe I will break the ice with a little question from my side. So Harini, just like a very general question from the first impressions of this keynote. So what lessons from Indian cities could, for example, inspire ecological transformation elsewhere in the global north or global south, maybe?
Thanks, Julian. That's a lovely question. I think one of the important lessons that we have learned is that spiritual connections, it need not be the sacred, it need not be a specific religion, but spiritual connections are very, very, very important. And somewhere in the West, we used to have, I mean, even in the European or North American traditions, you would have people with spiritual connections to trees, with emotional connections to trees and lakes. And we have lost that. I think somewhere in the idea of modernity, we have decided that like I said, I mean, it's not the ritualistic part of religion, but the spiritual part of religion, that you could stand in front of a tree, just like you climb a mountain and feel awe. You can stand in front of a large tree and feel awe. And I think that is something that you see so clearly across Indian cities, that you can, again, it could be Thailand, Bangkok, it could be, Kenya, it could be somewhere in Cameroon. You will see people walking out of the home in a city, and you see a sacred tree and you stop to bow and respect. Right? And that therefore means that ficus trees or certain kinds of keystone species become biodiversity support in the city, because no one will touch them, even in the middle of a highway. I think it's just that little note, that little check that there are other things besides humanity on Earth. Right? That is a very profound thing I think we can learn.
Yeah, definitely. I would just add another question, even more general than the first one. So if we imagine the, let's say, ecological city of the future, what would be, or in your, let's say, in your hopes, what would be its defining features, the ecological city of the future? What would be the ideal place for you?
For me, it would be a city where people and nature, the relationship, it would be a relational city, where the relation between people and nature becomes at the heart of the city. And that's what I was talking about in terms of process and not about plan. That whether it's the trees or the lakes or the parks or, an apartment with a few pots or a roadside, plantation or a community garden, it would be the fact that people are at the heart of it, that people take back some control over their lives. Because I think the challenge in cities is people are not in control of the planning process. Someone else is always in control of it. And so when you have that relationship between people and nature in all its variety, then you have a really thriving city.
Okay, I see a raised hand by Evita Schmieg. Evita, just ask your question.
Yeah, thanks for this interesting speech. I wanted to come back to the distinction you made between public goods and common goods. And I wonder whether because as I told you, I'm new in this issue, and I wonder whether this is an issue that could be, first, is it a lot dealt with in the discussion on urban development? And then is this something on which we could build more, and in what way?
Thank you. That's a very, very important question. So I worked for many years with Elinor Ostrom, who was the first woman to get the Economics Nobel Prize. And this is a distinction she first made in looking at cities in California, for instance. But there is a distinction between public goods and commons. And the main distinction becomes if you look at it in two ways, but if you look at it as not at common property regimes, but as common pool resources, who actually uses it? I might have a park in my city, in my neighborhood, which let's say people from across the city visit, and maybe people from outside visit. But if it becomes a public good, my contribution as a local resident, my stakes will be higher. And therefore, I should have a higher contribution in deciding how that park serves, whom it serves, how it's designed, what is allowed and what is disallowed. But instead, the city manages it. And the city might manage it for tourism, it might manage it for flood control, and it might not realize that the people around it maybe want to worship a tree or a goddess who was in the lake that was once their traditional goddess. And so you must have that in some way understanding who is local, and not completely. It cannot be that people who are local completely decide, right? Because that doesn't make any sense for planning. But in some way, they have a voice that matters because they're the ones on the ground and they're the ones who actually manage things on the ground. And so that distinction between what is commons and commoning, something that encourages, I think the biggest challenge that we have in cities today is that there is no commoning. We've forgotten who our neighbors are. We don't act together. We don't have these conversations. And we have seen, especially in cities where you have a lot of migrants, that commoning is very fragmented because relationships break down. But places of nature can be really good for commoning. And that is lost again when you have a public good.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for that answer. Did it answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Yes. I also see another raised hand by Jan Korte. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, and thank you, Harini, for this very insightful presentation. My name is Jan. I'm working in the sector project cities here at GIZ. You said in the beginning that most papers that are being written are mostly tackling cities in the global north and are also written by authors in the global north. So what we're looking at right now at GIZ also is the IPCC special report on cities. And I know that you've been a lead author for the IPCC, I think in AR5. And so with this, a bit of a problematic scientific landscape when it comes to integrating perspectives from the global south, I was wondering what your take on this special report might be. What hope do you maybe place on it? We at GIZ, we are still wondering how we can make best use of it. It's supposed to be published in 2027. What is your hope for it, especially with regards to integration of local, indigenous, spiritual knowledge? And maybe what role do you see for GIZ in there? There's maybe 3 questions, but yeah.
All excellent questions. I think IPCC has gone a long way in the past few years, and they have been very cognizant of diversity. So yes, they're making a lot of effort to make this much more representative than it used to be. I think one of the challenges, if I look at IPCC versus IPBES, right? And if you look at IPBES, I think the way in which it was designed from the beginning was without this excessive reliance on scientifically published rigorous studies because IPCC also wants to take in traditional knowledge, but their own processes don't allow for it as much. They want to take in case studies, but their processes don't allow for it. And then you have a reliance on literature, which is already skewed in a certain way. So I think this becomes a problem. And I think now because you do have some crosstalk between the IPBES and therefore biodiversity, for instance, is coming in, to the work of the IPBES, especially the special report on cities. Also, a lot of GEF funded projects are trying to connect biodiversity to the IPCC. So I'm hopeful. What could be done, I think, is maybe, see, one part is the special report itself, but there might be other ways to translate the special report. I mean, IPCC language, again, for special reports are very difficult for policymakers to understand. It. They would anyway look at sort of translated, documents. And in those translated documents, if one could embed case studies and say that IPCC is pointing to these things, but here's an example from Zambia, or here's an example from the Cameroon, or here's an example from Bengaluru, on how this is actually doable in this context. I think those, for me, would be very, very useful in terms of translating policies. I don't know if I completely answer your question, but I hope I do. Yes, I just wanted to add to the previous question also that I think this was the question on how you can actually restore cities as common goods and not just public goods is really, really important, because often public goods also get captured by private interests. And I think that's the other challenge, the other beauty of the commons. It's very difficult to capture them for private interests. So I'm very happy to have a longer conversation later if you would like to.
Perfect. Thank you. There's still a few moments left if somebody has a question. If not, I would ask one last question. It's also a little bit more general, but we spoke a lot about the differences between the global north and the global south. So how, from your experience, how do nature-based solutions differ in the implementation between cities in the global south and the global north? What are the main differences?
Sure, but I also do see two hands up. Can we take
Oh,
those
yeah,
questions?
we can take them first. At first, I think it was Lokesh. Just come in, activate your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very enlightening. My question mainly relates to the literature and the studies. You mentioned that the studies mostly is from the global north, and there's also tons of data in the global north, right? I mean, the National Oceanic and the Atmospheric Administration, I think they produce tons of data. And I guess that they have a lot of data. They also do a lot of studies, so it's also a very talked about topic, right? But in the context of global south, we don't have data to research first thing. And how do we go with that? Like, where do you see the academic field going there when there's no data? And yeah, exactly. Where do you see the future for the global south, and how to go on about the policy implication part?
Very important. I mean, one of the things we struggled so much with in Bangalore is finding the data. But I think you have a lot of groups now trying to reconstruct, for instance, something as simple as history. You don't have a lot of data on which lakes were created when, what trees were planted when. And what you have is what survives in the British colonial archive. So, white bureaucrats in one kind of perspective. What we try and do, and a lot of other researchers do in the global south, is to supplement them with oral histories. And you can get a lot from oral histories that you might not find otherwise. And that has been very valuable, even for things, even for scientific components like lake restoration. Which are the channels you restore? Where are the connectivities that used to be there in the past if they're not on planning maps, if they don't exist? You talk to people and you find out. And I think so talking to people, finding new ways, what we found is it's very important to link the quantitative using remote sensing, GIS, and whatever we have with the qualitative of going and talking to people of all kinds and across the class, caste, gender barrier, because you get very different insights depending on who you're speaking to. So that's for that. I wanted to I think Lena had one question.
Yes, thank you also from my side for taking us back to our forefathers' wisdom in a way. Beautiful keynote to our Urban October. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a little bit the devil's advocate role here. Mm-hmm. I heard you speak a lot about the importance of planning, but even more the importance of process, building commons, etc. But at the same time, we know that in particular, not just in the global north, but also very much so in the global south, economic interests are very. It's an uphill battle to try to find them or difficult to fight. And even when you can show all the added values on a broad spectrum or on broad dimensions of nature-based solutions, it's very difficult to protect certain places for common goods. And that's why I would like to ask you, because even participatory processes, if I talk to African mayors, I've just come back from Mozambique, they will say this also costs money. I don't have the funds for that. So how do you respond to mayors who want to create nature-based cities, respond to the strong urbanization forces that they see in the place they're responsible for? What do you advise them to do? Compare, and also how to finance such solutions. Of course, the community can chip in. I heard that. That's the idea of the commons as well. But of course, there's always what could you do? What else could you do with this area and the economic and financial possibilities that this might create? What are the solutions you have on offer? And I'm just also picking your brain because these are the conversations we and all the colleagues here who are listening have on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think when I meant local, I meant grassroots. And of what we have seen in Indian cities very clearly is that politicians respond to the numbers of people on the streets asking for something. And therefore, they also respond to the media very effectively. What we've used as scientists, really effectively in protecting the commons is working with activists and trying to create, so we provide the data, people hit the streets, you give the data in a different form to the journalists publish in the newspapers, and then you have people hitting the courts with the public interest litigations. And that combination of three things gets the mayors to act, because there are those powerful interests that are pushing the mayors in different directions. And that is really, really important, right? But your other question, where do they get the finance from? I think there are interesting finance mechanisms now where you can get corporates to pitch in to look, because they're also getting flooded. So a really good example is Gorakhpur, which is a small town in India, which is growing very fast. And the Gorakhpur municipal administration is working with an IT company now. So they use pumps in the short term to work with flooding. But they're also working with two political challenges. One is informal settlements, which are in the worst flooded places, but the poorest. So moving them, relocating them to redesign drainage becomes very important for the long-term resilience. But also companies, which have also captured, some of the best places, but which are best economic places, but really bad for flooding and choke points. And so what they do is the long conversations over time, while pumps are non-sustainable, but sort of immediate action in the short term. And they're finding that you get buy-in over time with grassroots. Similarly, my experience in Bombay is that a lot of the coastal waterfront, Bombay is one of the most expensive real estates in the world. And their communities have been able to recapture their beachfronts for 15 years now and hold out against the developers. So I think there's something to the specifics of how they begin, and it's been use of media, use of politicians hitting the streets, PILs, all the grassroots mobilizations that people do, but finance also, and corporates are willing to finance. The key is to prevent them from capturing the real estate then. And so, yeah, you do need the public processes that come in to say you can invest in this, but you can't then capture it for these interests. And that becomes key.
Thanks a lot. Looking at the time, I unfortunately have to end the Q&A session now because I still want to give Kristian Lempa a bit of room for his closing remarks. Kristian, just come in and the stage is yours now.
It's really a shame that I have to end this very good discussion and the great questions coming from the colleagues. But I think it's absolutely worthwhile to first of all say thank you, Professor Nagendra, for this inspiring words and insights into the green history of your city. And I have to say what stuck with me were how you called them, the pathways of hope, and how many practical solutions and approaches are already out there, just waiting to be implemented. And I have to say this is very interesting, especially for us in the field of international cooperation, and gives us some very specific tools to create a future that is worth living for everyone. And hereby, as you, Professor Nagendra, and you, Dr. Schmieg, mentioned, the cities of the future must be planned and built very differently from today's cities. We need to fundamentally change the relationship between cities and nature. And this is not just to be prepared for the upcoming challenges regarding climate change, but also to improve the lives of so many people already living under precarious living conditions. And I don't want to waste your time with too many numbers. You all know them, and the numbers that you put into your presentation were very consequential, but maybe I can add one number there, and that says that 1 in 3 people in informal settlements in the global south live already in flood zones and is at risk of catastrophic flooding already today. And living in informal settlements challenges their mobility, health, safety, and security. The nature-based solutions that we were talking about today are about only one component, but still they bring us closer to solving these crises. When implemented correctly, nature-based solutions can be an important building block in the necessary sustainable transformation of urban spaces. However, they must be adapted to the needs of a city and its residents in a context and location-specific manner. And although nature-based solutions can make an important contribution to the diverse challenges urban areas face today, they are in a way still a niche topic for cities, and we heard that today. They lack political integration into current urban plans and strategy, as well as the funding for effective implementation. So thanks again, Professor Nagendra, for showing us the importance of living in harmony with nature. And for closing of this event, I want to make a little advertisement and give you a little glimpse of what you can expect in this Urban October at GIZ. This year, GIZ celebrates the Urban October for the 8th time in a row. Our Urban October is an opportunity to engage in dialogue and follow events with various experts, partners, colleagues, and organizations worldwide. Similar to last year's events, we have yet again put together, and I would say, and you have to judge for yourself, an exciting program and a very diverse event calendar. And I invite you all to visit the City Transitions website. The link will be posted in the chat of this event, and register for those events that you would like to follow. One of the over 45 events in total, for example, is the Gender and Cities Awards ceremony, which will take place digitally this Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. Central European Time. The GIZ sector program Cities launched the Gender and Cities competition to spotlight feminist approaches in urban development, and now the winners are set to be revealed, and I was part of the group that was invited to select the winners, and I can only say do not miss it. We had really exciting and wonderful applicants, and the winners are really good examples of how to integrate this topic into the city's approach. And if you find time, you can also turn in for an insight into the Connect support unit. On October the 16th, they will highlight the importance of negotiating infrastructure and how it relates to the broader development of a city, including a dive into public-private partnerships. And to tie in with today's event, as well as to dive into the topic a bit further, there will be another session dedicated to nature-based solutions on October the 21st called Financing Nature, planning the business case for urban nature-based solutions, lessons from global practice. So there we'll dive deeper into what we have started today. This event will explore innovative financing approaches and investment strategies for nature-based solutions using practical examples from partners with particular considerations of ecological, social, and financial perspectives. So with these recommendations, I would like to warmly thank everyone who participated in organizing all these exchanges and events, making this year's Urban October a reality. Thank you for your tremendous effort and ongoing commitment. I very much look forward to the upcoming weeks, and I wish you all the informative exchanges, fruitful discussions, and inspirational debates. With this, I would like to close this opening session. Goodbye for now. Happy to see you again at one of the other Urban October events in the coming weeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, this is the end. Have a nice rest of the day, and I'm looking forward to all the cool Urban October events. Have a look at the program. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.